You're listening to Shoe In, covering the ins and outs of all things footwear, from sneakers to heels, loafers to slippers, and every type of shoe in between. Brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear.
What's up, Shoe and Show Nation? Welcome back to another exciting edition of the world's greatest footwear podcast. Thomas Crockett, you're my partner in crime today. How are things going on your end, my friend?
They are good. Just ready for another exciting podcast. I think we've got a good one today.
I do think we have a good one today. And so we do this thing called, we ask a lot of our members, a lot of our guests what their shoe story is. And I know a little bit about our guest shoe story, just a smidgen, just a tease. And it's probably the coolest one we've ever had. And so not to set the bar way too high and to set expectations super high. Our guest today is Elias Stahl, who's CEO and co-founder of Hilos. Elias, welcome to the Shoe and Show program. And let's start out right at the start. What is your shoe story? How did you get into this industry?
Well, appreciate it. Thanks for having me, Matt and Thomas. High bar, but because everyone has an incredible shoe story. And what I love about this industry is once people find themselves in it, there's no leaving it. They really get married to it. My background was a little bit non-traditional from a footwear perspective. I began in the Israeli Special Forces. After that, came back stateside, and after graduate school in DC, went to a software company called Handshake and ended up becoming their VP of product. Software you don't think leads to a lot of footwear. We're working with a lot of actual supply chain companies, Caterpillar, Estee Lauder, BMW. And it was there that I was shocked, one, at just how traditional manufacturing still is, how slow and grimy and wasteful it can be, and how even a well-capitalized, well-intentioned, very smart executive team at a company whose job it is to make things couldn't really change the core of their business. There's a lot of reason for that, but software was always just around the edges. It couldn't penetrate into really changing how and where we made things. At the same time, I became aware of new technologies like 3D printing and generative design in my work with these brands. And it was apparent to me that there was this incredible moment coming where we could begin dreaming about what the next century supply chain looked like. And it wasn't going to be science fiction. It was the ability not just to make in one place, but to make everywhere, to make products that are closer to the customer, to make products that are more sustainable, and that ultimately usher in a new wave of design that empower designers and their customers to be able to bring craft back to product. And nowhere was that more potent than in footwear. I mean, footwear is an incredible industry because of the blend of tradition and heritage and legacy with scaled manufacturing. And you go to a footwear factory and that blend is very apparent. It's still very high labor, but that labor has also been really commoditized into essentially high volume output. And a lot of the craft has left our shores, and a lot of the craft is hard to find in a lot of really high volume factories. And so the impetus for Hilos was to seize on both the immense amount of overproduction and waste we see in the industry and the disconnect between supply and demand, and these new technologies that do allow us to think differently about this next century of supply chain and how we can really allow for on-demand and zero-waste product to come back to our shores, but in a way that elevates that craft, that respects that heritage, that honors it, and actually brings it back home. And that's a mammoth mission, but it's one that I haven't met a shoe dog yet who can't get behind it, who doesn't respect and love the heritage of everything about footwear and how incredibly complex and beautiful it is, and wants to be able to elevate the hand and the labor that goes into it, but also wants to be able to make beautiful product, to make it at scale, to make it here, to make it anywhere, and not just based on this moment in the 20th century where we had a specific free trade regime and specific countries that were developing. And I think that's what we became pretty cozy with over the last 60 years. And that's not going to be the case for the next 60. So we have an opportunity to do something that's really good for the industry, good for the planet, good for us in the US, but it also really respects this industry and its heritage. So I don't know if that's a roundabout way of how I got into it. And of course, Portland. There's a Portland side of the story too, which we can talk about. But it's been love ever since.
Yeah, I'm also interested in the technology and the 3D printing aspect. Just can you tell us more about that, and also like where does 3D printing make sense for the industry, and maybe where does it not make sense for utilizing 3D printing?
And I think that's a key question, because the industry got burnt with 3D printing 10 years ago, and for good reason. There was a lot of hype. There was a lot of 3D. We're going to have Star Trek style 3D printers that are going to make anything we want. Earl Grey hot, and it didn't happen. And you can't take a 200-year-old supply chain, at least the mass industrial manufacturing of footwear today, and suddenly have a nascent technology that's 15, 20 years old and expect it to outcompete. At the same time, there are applications that are really effective for footwear. And what we've seen just over the last 4 years that has been game changer is the ability to print high quality materials for end use product that outperform traditional foams, that outperform traditional aesthetics that you have with like EVA or PU, and that allow for lower componentry, less labor, so you can make certain types of footwear in the US at a price that is competitive with overseas, and at a performance and design quality that outcompetes some of what we're seeing from overseas. That's all just happened over the last 9 to 12 months from a pricing standpoint. And we're seeing a lot of really big focus. Over the last 3 years, by some accounts, 50% of footwear has left China. There's no T1 today, there's no manufacturer today that believes that they can be globally competitive by staying where they are. They have to be able to be good at making things everywhere, not just in China or Vietnam or Korea. They have to be good at making things. That's their franchise. And that means closer to their key markets. That might mean in their key markets. And there are certain applications, certain types of footwear that 3D is very competitive for them to be able to bring that production closer to shore, more on demand, and more in a read and react kind of throughput. So that's where we see 3D printing is much more on the componentry level, and components that provide design or performance benefits that allow for more local or close to local production much faster. And that we can talk a little about what that means from an on-demand perspective, but I think what you see happening in apparel with Zara and now Shane, the ability to really speed up design through to production in apparel, that's coming to footwear with technologies like these, but in a way where we can actually produce less rather than overproduce. And we can start small batches and spin up when something really hits.
Now, Elias, you mentioned like getting burned 10 years ago on 3D printing. I can recall about that time, there were all these sexy videos. You mentioned Star Trek, like where like lava's pouring out and a shoe's being formed. And there's some big brands that were propping up U.S. domestic manufacturing or innovation hubs or speed factories, if you will, to try and do some of this. But it seemed at the time the goal was actually to develop the technology and then ship it back to Asia where the traditional production was happening. How is Hilos different than that? What's the business model for Hilos? What's the ROI proposition for a company that may just now be hearing about you, which I can't imagine is true, but let's just say, how is that different? How are you going to kind of anchor things here or to wherever the local economy and the local production is happening?
Yeah, well, Hilos is a design to production product creation platform that focuses on developing the applications that make sense for 3D and delivering an end-to-end 3D design to production platform for brands and their designers to be able to take an idea, move it to a factory sample within a week, and then launch it into market within a month. And then make on demand so that orders can come in through e-commerce or through a store and go directly to our factories in the US, be made and shipped directly to that customer within 72 hours.
Wow.
And so from a brand perspective, there's I think three things that I've seen this industry really gravitate towards and need. The first is the ability to really fundamentally innovate. And there's a lot of different compounding, and everyone talks about compounding, and that's all the focus. Like, can our compound be better than your compound? And everyone knows that Nike and Adidas get the best stuff, and they get exclusivity on it. And then everyone else gets to all the mids get to kind of take what's left, and the smalls, good luck to them. It's not fair. How can each brand build their own innovation true to them in a way that's affordable? And this opens that up. the ability for brands to be able to design their own performance, their own material. The feel of their brand is distinct, their own design language in a way that is very unique to them, and to test without liability, without risk. Second is the ability to launch things that are hot in market, not designing. I've seen design cycles shrink to 9 months, maybe even 6, but they're still way far out of where this market is. This market's now a 24-hour design cycle market. And I know that's a headache for a lot. You have a designer that's been in it 30 years. They're like, I'm not going to be able to do that. But the younger designers that we have on they're thinking in 24-hour design cycles. And so the ability to be able to meet that is huge. And then finally, the on-demand, the financial and kind of environmental implications are immense. This is an industry that is forced to produce at 15, 20% of total MSRP because it can't afford the downstream waste, right? There's all this middle margin that gets eaten up by inventory, carrying costs, discounting, liquidation. And so it's really hard for brands to invest in higher quality or higher performance or more sustainable materials because there's this cost equation. And we've seen brands also struggle with really developing a total cost equation where different parts of brands are accountable for different margin, but ultimately, how much is this costing you end to end, product to customer and back at the end of the day? And the ability to have much higher sell-through with much lower inventory cost is a drastic different model for brands. So they can invest more in higher quality materials, higher performance. They can launch more SKUs and everything's always in stock. Everything sells through. There's no discounting, no inventory liquidation. And then they're able to make sure that they're getting the right product in the right hands at the right time. And that's one of the biggest benefits of on-demand and changing the pricing paradigm of this industry in a really fundamental way.
Wow, so there's a lot to unpack there because as you were talking, I was like nodding my head, like right on. I mean, inventory management is this art mixed with a little science, but it's our main cost, against anyone's P&L, right? It's this huge kind of thing on your balance sheet that you're trying to figure out how to sell through, and if you can whittle that down. You didn't even mention duties, right? Like you avoid the whole duty. We pay, $3-4 billion a year in duties alone on our imports. Talk to me about whether or not you envision this meeting just a certain market segment within the industry, because let's face it, there's a lot of mass retail out there, and the average American buys their shoes at mass retail, and they buy it at Kohl's or Target or Walmart, which are, provide competitively priced shoes. And so that's a lot of the 2.5 billion pairs that we import in every year as an industry. Are you looking to break the mold there as well? Or kind of what are your channels that you envision are going to be successful within the industry, at least at the outset of this project?
I can tell you that all of the names that you identified and more, this technology is in their price points and reach at scale. And so we are, over the next 12 months, going to be launching the lowest cost, not just 3D, but made in the USA footwear at the highest volumes ever attempted in on-demand. And the ability to do that with partners that know that they need to bring supply chains back to the US, but they also know that they have to hit costs and they can't sell shoes for more than $100 or $80, and they need it to make sense financially. And so that's really the two things that 3D has yet to prove, and that we're going to be showing the market over the next year: volume and cost. And if it's not scalable, then there's always going to be limited investment going after it. And if you can't really hit pricing targets to be inclusive to the 90% of the industry that's below $100 MSRP, then you're not going to have the impact you need. And so that's set to change, and it's going to be, I think, a very pivotal moment for the industry.
You mentioned innovation. I know it's hard to talk about innovation today without talking about AI, artificial intelligence. People have extreme views on that a lot of times. It's either, Terminator, Skynet scenario, or it's the greatest thing ever invented. Where do you fall on that? And does Hilos, are you incorporating AI? Do you see that as, how do you see that as impacting the footwear industry when it comes to innovation?
I think we tend to have the bias of overinflating expectations in the short term and inflating them in the long term. So I do think it's going to have a pretty seismic impact. And if you look ahead 60, 80 years, it's going to be completely different from how we think about machine to human interface. That's, I think, the biggest impact it will have. But specifically now today, Hilos leverages AI specifically for how we think about generative design. Our workflow allows designers or line planners to upload their you can create your own custom model by uploading your brand DNA, your archives, everything that you've done in the past. You can monitor new trends, reference images, sketches, and generate 2D, that's pretty tried and true. With the Hilos Studio S platform, that 2D gets generated into 3D watertight files that we can actually factory sample and then move into production. So it's automating a lot of the development side of things to allow designers and line planners to immediately get their vision into market. And that's where we see the benefit of generative AI. It's very good at learning from large masses of information what will actually work for manufacturing given our patents and ways that we assemble footwear with 3D. So we're able to define its logic and then generate a huge variety of designs given different brands' inputs.
One of the questions around that, and you gave it a phenomenal presentation about AI and kind of broader considerations at the Footwear News CEO Summit in New York over the summer. But one of the things that we talk about as it relates to AI, we had IBM into our executive summit in DC in April, was like the IP protection of uploading your information to a platform that would then therefore own your information. So how are you advising your clients? How do you protect what you are creating at Hilos in an AI environment? And what would you advise our listeners to do as they're thinking about using these tools? Do you dump the whole catalog on and just cross your fingers that it doesn't get knocked off or scraped for some other kind of generative design? Kind of walk us through your thinking when it comes to protecting the designs of our companies.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting one because current judicial hearings have painted the direction that AI-generated content will all be public sourced. And content that is developed in conjunction with AI is also not patentable, and only the human element of authorship is copyrightable, is protectable, right? And so and this also has to do with the vision for how we think technology should really serve humanity and what is AI's job versus the human's job. Hilos' answer is very clear. Creativity is always going to be the human domain. Creating something from nothing and creating newness is always that human element. And we want AI to drive human-centered design. And this was part of what we showed at the CEO Summit, ways to use AI to essentially eliminate the barrier between digital and physical so that the human designer can design in a physical world and it can immediately be replicated in 3D and immediately then printed, sampled, moved into production. So how can we use technology to accelerate and empower the human, but not to force designers to have to work through a keyboard, work on the mouse to get something done. Right now we've had to work the way the machines want us to work. Now we can be freer and technology can be made a little bit more invisible around us. And that's always been the dream, right? That's always the focus. What does that protopian vision of the future look like where technology can be invisible around us? And part of the process we have with Studio S actually documents then the Human Authorship Act in the physical world. So we're building in the copyright protection into the act of creation that the human is initiating. And how the AI then takes that and creates the 3D, right, is going to be derived from that copyrighted source. So that's the way that we focus on protecting that source content. And then any business that is creating models either with partners or on their own should just make sure that those models are built out in a way where they're firewalled, I think, from any other potential competitors. So the way that we do that when working with our partners is we have a base model that we've developed ourselves that's highly advanced in 3D asset generation for footwear. But then we build out separate, completely firewalled models for each brand, like different branches from a tree.
You talked about manufacturing and some ways we could bring that back to the U.S. I know you're actually working on that in Portland. You're part of the Made in Old Town initiative. Just want to get your thoughts on that. Where is that? What is it? If anybody doesn't know what Made in Old Town is, can you share that with us?
No, I appreciate that. I think Made in Old Town might be one of the more exciting things, one of the most exciting things happening in the industry today. And it is a monumental vision for how the industry will come together around a green innovation campus in Portland We received funding from the state and the city to build a 4-square block innovation campus that will come to encompass 10 buildings and 323,000 square feet that will bring together T1s, suppliers and vendors, and brands around advanced product creation capabilities, and ultimately the ability to do read and react lines and small volume production. There's this stands at the intersection of two moments in time, one where the industry, like I said earlier, acknowledges that they have to be able to make anywhere. And I can't tell you how many T1s I know that I hear every week say, oh, we're looking for where to be in the US. We don't know where, we don't know what size, we don't know how we're gonna do it, but we know we need something. We know we need something in the US. At the same time, the list of cities is always three. It's always, is it gonna be in Boston, Portland, or LA, right? And obviously I'm biased, but Oregon has over 500 outdoor brands, over 300 of them are in Portland, and we host the Northwest Materials Show and Functional Fabrics Fair twice a year that are huge moments for the industry. How can we take that center of gravity and make it year-round and really build the kind of collaboration, the kind of chance encounters that happens when you're overseas in Asia for 3 weeks and you're meeting with vendors and suppliers and T1s all together? You get a lot done. That's the moment that we want to happen year-round on this innovation campus. And so phase one, which will be opening its doors at the end of this year, is 3 buildings. One will be an entirely T1 production facility, but the other 2 are really broad-based for the whole industry. And that involves a hub, which is 4 brands to have access to a complete Asia-level sample room, prototyping and maker lab, event space. It's essentially taking what each brand has to work with overseas, but brings it back home. So now it's not just the T1 running an innovation lab, it's now an innovation lab for every brand to be able to access and work with. And this is huge for brands because only Nike in Portland really has the ability to do that. And then right on the other side of that building block is 7 floors of vendors, suppliers, and brands, officed and working together collaboratively around distinct challenges like color, right? Or around bonding and adhesion, or performance testing and biomechanics. And the first question I get is, are people going to play nice with each other? And the second question I get is, are people going to play nice with each other? And I have
that
to say,
was my question. That's what my next question was going to be. So you got it.
The way that I answer this is ultimately, our job is fundamentally as curators. We have to bring together the first 20 people are the culture of the company. The first 20 people at this campus, the first 20 brands and suppliers are going to be the set that want to be around others. They're not going to just want an office and be off on their own. They want that dynamism. And there's tons of security around IP. People have closed floors times that they book for when they have their innovation teams in there. They have their own private brand suites that house more sensitive things. But ultimately, we're really identifying and bringing in people that have this post-collaborative mindset, that they want their brand or they want their technology or they want their factory to help shape the future of that industry. And they know that happens by bringing in the suppliers with them to do that, or bringing in the brand to do them with that, bringing in the T1s to help them do that. And I didn't expect this, but the outpouring of inbound has been insane. The amount of people, be them T1s that are doing factory tours between Boston and Portland, or brands that are saying, you mean we can actually do product creation and then immediately ship it to a T1, and that T1 could be across the street? There's a palpable excitement. And at the same time, this is happening in the US where there's a hugely felt need to bring back manufacturing, to invest in advanced manufacturing, and that's happening at all levels. So we have huge city, state, and federal support for this. And I don't think it would be possible without this recognition that we need to invest in what the future of the American city looks like, the future of the American economy around manufacturing. We invested in this overseas supply chain 50 years ago. Let's have them invest in us now. And let's build something that becomes that center of gravity for the industry. And it's been exciting to see just how many people from Eric Liedtke to Noel Kinder to all the team that have jumped in, really pro bono, just saying, we want to make this happen. This is for the industry, this is for the city we love, and this is going to be the biggest thing that we can attach our name to. And we've attached our names to some pretty big things in our life.
Oh yeah, there's some big players, man. You got to be super excited about it. Our listeners can go to madeinoldtown.org. That's madeinoldtown.org to learn more about the project. This is going to come out in September. We're going to be touring it next week if you're listening to this as it drops. So I'm very excited to see it in person. And my last question for you is kind of, as you were kind of in the Israeli Defense Forces and you made your way through industry and now you're in Portland, what has kind of been the big challenge that you didn't expect, and how have you overcome it? And kind of what's been maybe the pleasant surprise that you've seen coming in as an outsider into an industry and bringing critical thought when we need it at a critical moment for footwear companies, both large and small?
I think the biggest challenge in this industry has been, I'd say, skepticism, a healthy skepticism. It's a good thing. Skepticism and sometimes a little bit of isolation between different parts of it. So this was an industry that used to be very, very tightly knit, and over time, I think that's been harder and harder, and it's gotten, innovation has gone more and more overseas. Cost centers are more and more siloed in brands. And so brands being able to really understand the total cost equation or cost of ownership of product, that's a challenge for brands right now. Being able to take risks and understand whether something, help build that future, that's been a challenge, and it's a challenging market for a lot of brands for that. But at the same time, the other side of that is that this is an incredibly close and deeply anchored industry in each other.
Yeah.
And there's this incredible, you know it as well as I do, but when you have these, two brands get together and they all know each other because they all used to work together in different brands, and they saw each other boarding that flight a week ago, and now they're back, and they might not be talking about exactly the product they're developing, but everything else. And there's an incredible opportunity for that level of closeness and commitment to each other to really shape this next century for this industry in a way that everyone will do incredibly well in. And so it's kind of like a close community is naturally kind of suspicious of new things and outsiders, but then when it's accepted, it becomes part of that culture and part of that DNA in a really strong way. I see that as two sides of the same coin. And so this industry does have its challenges. It's been burnt before. It's hard and expensive to innovate. A lot of people are in tight positions, and the market is moving in a different direction from where the supply chain has it. Yeah. And so there's a lot of challenges, but at the same time, I don't know any industry that can rise to them quite like we can.
Yeah, I love that. It's a family, it really is. And Elias, I'm so glad that you're a part of this family because you're bringing that innovation, that critical thought. And I think you probably have some shoe dogs that are super grateful that there's a future ahead of them where they don't have to hop on that flight to Hong Kong every other month. It's been a long journey back and forth over the Pacific. I think a lot of people are incentivized to try to bring that back home. And so kudos to you and to your team for doing that and for being an innovator. Our listeners should go to hilos.studio, that's HILOS.studio, to learn more about the Hilos project. And I mentioned madeinoldtown.org. Elias, thank you for joining us. Thanks for coming on Shoe and Show. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and I'm excited for you to see everything next week.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. Folks, it's been another exciting edition of Shoe and Show where we're talking to innovators, product creators, critical thought leaders around our industry. And, we're a $115 billion industry, and so to have someone coming in and shaking things up and showing us innovation is always welcome. And so we hope that you found this conversation as interesting as I know Thomas and I did. Go to shoeandshow.com for all of our amazing episodes. Our catalog is massive. There's tons of content there to download and to listen to. And our hope is that you come back next week for another exciting edition. And until next time, Shoe and Show is out.
Shoe In has been brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. For information about FDRA, visit fdra.org.